Hey guys, let's find out what Mr. McBroom is up to with his war of Mr. McBroom's ears. So if you remember, the grasshoppers were coming and they grabbed brooms, and he said that it was the beginning of the Great Grasshopper War, or as it came to be called, the War of McBroom's Ears. We began yelling and running about and waving our weapons. The grasshoppers spun over our ripened cornfield. They feasted their eyes and flew off. "We scared 'em away," Tim declared. "No," I said. "That was just the advance party. They went back for the main herd. And here they come." Acres of grasshoppers, square miles of grasshoppers. They came streaking towards us like a great roaring thunderbolt of war. "Brooms and branches," I yelled. The hungry devils tucked napkins under their chins and swooped down for the attack. Mercy, the air got so thick that with hoppers you could swing a bucket once and fill it twice. They made a whirling, hopping, jumping fog. We could barely see a foot beyond our noses, but we could hear the ravenous rascals. They were chomping and chewing up our cornfields and spitting out the cobs. They ate that farm right up and down to the ground exactly 4 seconds flat. Then they rose in the air, still hungry as wolves, and waited for the next crop. "Pa, they skimmed my watermelons," cried Chester. "Pa," Mary cried, "they didn't even wait for my prize tomato to ripen. They ate 'em green." "Pa," little Claretta said, "what happened to your socks?" I looked down, and glory be, those infernal dinner guests had eaten the socks right out of my toes. Green socks. All they left were the holes in the shoes. Some of the young uns broke into tears. "We won't be able to grow anything for the county fair." "We're not beat yet, my lambs," I said, thinking as hard as I could. Those hoppers did have us outnumbered, but not so outsmarted. "I'm going to town for seed. Better clear away the corn cobs." I drove to town in our air-cooled Franklin automobile and was back before noon with 50 pounds of fine seed. Grasshoppers were still stretched all over the sky waiting, and the young'uns had cleared the farm, throwing the corn cobs out in a heap of dirt beside the well. "Not a moment to lose," I said. "Help me scatter the seeds," and before long our farm was bushed out, green as a 1-acre jungle. Those hoppers smacked their lips, fought to get it. They whirled and they swarmed and they cranched and they crunched, and the crop disappeared as if it was sucked up by a tornado. Well, you should have seen how surprised they were. The first wave of hoppers were all about breathing fire, and no wonder. They had just dined on the hottest green peppers you'd ever seen. They streaked off in a hurry looking for something to drink, and of course there were still tons of grasshoppers left. We kept sowing crops of hot green peppers all afternoon until there wasn't a jumping leg to be seen. We found out later that they had swarmed to a lake next to the country and drank it dry. But they'd be back, and the young'uns would have to grow their prize winners in a hurry. "Pa, look," said little Claretta. She was pointing to the tall heap of dirt littered with corn cobs. Glory be, the grasshoppers had missed a long kernel, and it had taken root behind our backs, and a cornstalk was a-growing up as big as a tree. That dirt hill was powerful rich, and the roots of that wondrous stalk were having a banquet. A single ear of corn began to form before our eyes. Big, why, it was already fatter than a pot-belly stove and still growing. "That looks like a prize winner to me," I declared. You scamps will go partners." Jill, Hester, and Polly climbed to their tree house to keep a sharp eye out for grasshoppers. The ear of corn grew longer and fatter, and it was a beauty. The stalk began to bend under its weight, and it was ripening fast. Didn't we get busy, though? We fixed loops of rope around that ear so as to let it down easy. Will climbed up a ladder with a buck saw and went to work. It must have taken him 5 minutes to saw that giant ear of stalk. We eased it down with our ropes, and I tell you, we could hardly believe our eyes. That ear of corn was so big you couldn't see it a single glance. You had to look twice. Grasshoppers! Jill shouted from the treehouse. Grasshoppers are coming, Pa! Here's how big it is. It's huge. Huge. Quick, I said, into the house. It took us all to lift the ear of corn, but it wouldn't fit through the door, and it wouldn't fit through the window. And the well, I shouted. We lowered it by ropes and covered the well over with some rusty sheets of tin. And just in time, those hoppers had spotted our great ear from the sky and came whirling across the farm for the green blizzard. But they couldn't get the ear of corn. It was safe for the night, I said. How will we ever get it past the hoppers to the fair tomorrow? Mary asked. I don't have to tell you that the problem gave me a sleepless night. About 4 in the morning, I jumped out of bed and woke the young'uns. Brooms and buckets, I said. Follow me. We tiptoed outside and carefully not to wake the jumping legs. We quietly raised our ear of corn from the well and replaced the sheets of tin. Then I filled the buckets from the shed. Start painting, I whispered, and the young'uns dipped their brooms and painted the giant corn ear from end to end all over. At sunup, the grasshoppers rose from the fields and went looking for breakfast. They headed straight for the well, banging their heads on that rusty tin. My, what a clatter! They thought our enormous big ear of corn was still down there. Well, it was in plain sight, though, only they didn't recognize it. The husk wasn't green anymore. We had whitewashed it. They had painted it white. We lifted it to the roof of our old Franklin and tied it down. Everybody pile in, I smiled. Starting up the motor, we're off to the fair. Just then, Mr. Slim-Faced John came along. Howdy, he smiled. I'll paint your farmhouse cheap. Oh, I'd dearly like that, Mama said, red with white windowsills. Done, I said. You'll find paint in the shed. And we were off. Well, you should have seen heads turn along the way. What was that thing on the roof of the McBroom car? An ear of corn? No, sir, no farmer can raise corn that big and white as chalk. We bumped along the road, following the signs to the county fair. We enjoyed the sights, barns and silos, and cows chewing their cud in the shade. How much farther? Polly asked. 10-12 minutes, I said. Be patient. I noticed the prairie windmills beginning to turn, and a hot wind was a-coming up, dragging a cloud with it. We could hear the rumble of thunder. How much further, Paul? Tim asked. 8-10 minutes. Be patient, I said. But I didn't like the look of that cloud, and it grew darker and heavier and came blowing our way. Heads in, I called to the young'uns. Thunder shower ahead. We met the storm head on. It didn't amount to much, but those raindrops were almost hot enough to scald you. They bounced like sparks off the hood, and a moment later the sky was blue again and the summer shower was behind us. How much further, Pa? Mary asked. 6-8 minutes. Be patient, I said. Pa, Will said. He hadn't bothered to pull his head in the window, and his hair was all wet. Pa, looks what happened to our corn. I jammed on the brakes and got to see it. Low as me. There it is. It is big corn. Lo and behold, the husk was bright green again. The summer shower had washed off the whitewash. I jumped back in behind the wheel. Watch for grasshoppers. I'm watching, Pa, said little Coloretta, and here they come. Well, it was a race. The hoppers came roaring after us in full battle uniform. The old Franklin creaked and groaned and cranked, and her heart was in it. We bumped in and out of the ruts and jumped a few. They're gaining on us, Pa. I had my foot on the pedal to the floorboard. Soon we could see the flags and the banners of the county fair ahead, but not soon enough. The first hop legs were landing on the roof, and we could hear them ripping and tearing into husk. By the time we reached the fairgrounds, we had nothing left but the cob. But that old Franklin started to backfire, banging and booming, and something fierce. Those hoppy legs jumped a mile, and we made it across the fairgrounds. I charged right into the main exhibition building and jammed on the brakes. Shut the doors! I shouted. Grasshoppers are coming! The door swung shut, and we could barely breathe easy at least. Folks began to cluster around, their eyes raising, and their jaws fell open in the wonder of our ear of corn. And I declare if those hungry rascals hat and husk it neat as you please. We lifted it down off the roof and put it on display, and the judges came by and asked what name to enter it in. McBroom, I smiled. Will, Jill, Hester, Chester, Peter, Polly, Tim, Tom, Mary, Larry, and little Cloretta McBroom. Well, the judges gave it first, second, third, and honorable mention. But, my, it was getting overheated in there when the doors were closed. The young'uns lined up to have their pictures taken for the county paper. There was one long smile reaching from Will to the end to little Cloretta at the other. And the noon sun kept beating down on the roof, and all of a sudden there came a loud bang. I thought at first it was our old tired Franklin, but no, it was the youngest enormous prize-winning ear of corn beginning to pop. The inside of the building had grown so hot that it was perfect for a popcorn popper. Well, it did get noisy in there. Kernels swelled and exploded like white cannonballs. They bounced off the roof and the walls. Pop, 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 pop. Folks ducked and ran and took cover. Corn in their rows boomed away in regular broadsides. I tell you, popcorn was flying all over the halls and piling up like heavy snowfall. Pop, 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 pop. In no time at all, we were buried in light, fluffy popcorn. It swelled to the roof and forced open the doors and overflowed the buildings at both ends. There wasn't a grasshopper left in sight. All the ruckus had sent them a-flying. As far as I know, they headed for the full moon. Must have heard it was made of green cheese. We never saw them again. We stayed that afternoon like everyone did. Folks melted up buckets of prize butter, and someone went to town for barrels of salt, and there was more than enough fresh popcorn to go around, salt and buttered, and it was delicious. One piece was enough to feed an entire family. Did I tell you I'd as soon live as... Let me start over. Did I tell you that I'd as soon live in a tree as tamper with the truth? Well, when you got back that night, we found our farmhouse chewed and gnawed and eaten to the ground. Mr. Slim-Faced John was not only tall, skinny, and tangled-haired, nearsighted, but he was also colorblind, and he had painted our house green. Yes, it's mighty crowded living up here in the young'uns' treehouse, but those prize ribbons, they're a mighty sight to see. So the guy painted their house green, and the grasshoppers ate it. And there's the end. There's Mr. McBroom. The end. I'm sad it's over. It was a good book, wasn't it? And there's a second one, too. So we'll have to read that maybe next summer. Bye, guys.